Thanks for stopping by Pete's Garage. The next thing you might decide to reuse are the bearings. You have both the crank main bearings and the rod bearings. And it is possible to reuse both of them, but there are some things to keep in mind. Number one, the most important thing, when you are tearing the engine down, make sure you put the bearings in order. Keep them in order. When I took them out of the block, I put them in plastic bags and numbered them for the position for both the crank and the rods, so I can put them back in the same order and they go on the same journal that they were broken in on. That's very important. Secondly, when you put the bearings back in the block, on the pistons, on the cap, whenever you put them back in, make sure you clean thoroughly inside the block and clean the bearings on both sides, the front and the back. You don't want anything on the back of the bearing, so when you put it in, if there's something small underneath the bearing and it's pushing on it, you'll cause a problem and you'll see a wear mark. Now, we'll talk about what conditions you should replace the bearings regardless of the condition. But if there are any deep gouges, scratches, something that looks terrible, obviously you're going to want to replace the bearings. But the ultimate test is measuring the gap, measuring the main bearing gap, the main caps, and the rod gap, the gap between the bearing and the journal that it was sitting on. And here's a piece of advice. Whenever you're doing that, whenever you're checking clearances, I use plastic gauge. I'm going to use plastic gauge on all these right now. We're going to check it to see how they come out. Always buy new plastic gauge when you do this job. The reason is, first of all, it's only $5 or $2.50 for one size. $5 will get you a packet, the 1 to 3 and it was a 2 to 6 thousandths, so the green and the red. Always buy new, because plastic gauge is nothing more than pieces of wax. And when you open it up, it's very, very small. You might not see it inside there. The plastic gauge is just a piece of wax, a round piece of wax. And wax, this wax is no different than you have if you have a candle in your house. You know, sometimes you see a candle and it's pulled from around the sides where the wax has shrunk because the moisture has evaporated from it. If you have old plastic gauge, and I just happen to have plastic gauge here that's maybe a year old at the most, I went to look at it and I opened it up and the plastic gauge has shrunk down considerably in size. Not only that, most of the pieces that were in here just completely almost evaporated, and there's almost nothing left. So if you do the job, always buy new plastic gauge, new gauge material, so you can make sure you're getting the proper measurement. Now, let's take a look at the crank and the bearings, and we'll review real quick what they should look like and what may or may not be permissible to use again and when you should replace the bearings. Now, first we look at the crank here, and we can see that the main journals here are very clean. None of them have any deep gouges, scratches, nothing on them. They're very clean. Here is our thrust bearing surface, and here's the thrust bearing that I took out of there, and it has just minimal wear on there, normal break-in. You can still see the lines where it was broken in, so this is in very good shape. The thrust surfaces are in excellent condition. Now, this journal right here, we're going to talk about this one. And usually the rule of thumb I use is that if you can see a scratch, you want to take a closer look at it. And generally, if you can run your fingernail across it and feel it, it's deep enough where you might have to do something with it. And if I go like that with my fingernail, and if it catches my fingernail, meaning if I go like this and it stops, it's deep enough, you should have it polished down. If I go like that, I can feel that little scratch going right there. I can feel it, but it's not deep enough where it grabs my fingernail. So that means it's less than probably, I don't know, maybe 5 to 10 microns, half a thousandth of an inch, something like that, right there. Now, this position right here, this is the bearing that came off of this journal, this piston right here. And you can see the line in the bearing right here where this was riding on the crank right there, which caused that little scratch. And that, I'm going to say, most likely was at startup, and whatever was there that caused that little scratch was gone quickly. It didn't cause any more damage. And even though this has this tiny little mark on the bearing and a tiny little on the crankshaft here, I'm going to say it's still okay to use, so I can reuse these bearings. Now the bearing clearance should be anywhere from 1.5 to, at the max, 3. So I'm using the 2 to 6 thousandths red plastic gauge, and I have a small piece of red plastic gauge on each one of the main bearings, covering the entire width. Covering the entire width is important so you can see if there's any variation. Now I will put all the bearing caps on very carefully, just so I don't let the plastic gauge slip. And I don't want to tap it down too much because I don't want to squish the plastic gauge. So I'll do that for all of these. Before I forget, after you do your bearing check for clearances, don't forget to clean the wax off the crank and the bearing. You don't want to leave that on there. I'm just going to run these down, but I'm not going to tighten them down. Now I have to torque them all down to make the job easy. I'm going to use my torque transducer. That's my N-Puds track torque transducer. I've made a video about this. Just to make it easy, 3 steps to 90 foot-pounds, 30, 60, and then 90. Now I'll just remove them all and we'll take a look. Now with all the bearing caps removed, you can see the red line going down there, and all you have to do is hold the paper up to each one of these to measure the clearance. And again, remember, it's supposed to be 1.5 to 3. And we go anywhere from, let's say, maybe 2.5, because it's smaller than 3, bigger than 2. And I'm not just looking at the red. There's actually a ghost mark that's next to it. So you have to get the entire thing. That's why I'm saying this is 2.5 maybe. This one again, 2-ish. Maybe... probably 3. And they seem to be getting smaller towards the front, but this one's right at 3. 3. And, well, a little under 3. A little under 3. A little under 3. A little under 3, not 2. So it might be 2.5. So it looks like they're all around 2.5 going straight across. The clearance on all the bearings is good. Now that I know the bearing clearance is okay, there are no scratches, gouges, nothing really bad with the bearings. They seem to break even evenly. I have them right exactly where they were when I took them out of the other block. And that means that this block was machined and honed to exactly the same size as the other block, because the other ones were roughly around 2 thousandths as well. Very, very close. So in this case, bearings look in great shape. Clearance is fine. Perfectly okay to reuse those bearings. Next we'll be talking about the rods. Rod bearings are tough to measure when the crank is not in the block because it's so sloppy and you want to do it accurately. I'll do that when it's in the block. We'll check the rod bearings and a couple other things. The cam bearings will do that as well. Thanks for stopping by Pete's Garage.